And now it is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce the next speaker. And the next speaker is Dr. Kiran Kumar. Dr. Kiran Kumar is a professor of psychiatry at the Vaidehi Institute of Medical Sciences and Research. The person whom you heard a little while ago commenting about the program, Dr. Sattar is the head of the Department of Psychiatry at the Vaidehi Institute of Medical Sciences and Research. Now, to very quickly, Kiran has a very elaborate and long biodata, but I'll just give you some of the highlights of his previous work. He is the best outgoing student in MD Psychiatry from JSS Medical College. He's a gold medalist at the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences. He has won other awards such as the Katil Appupai Award of the Indian Psychiatric Society Karnataka chapter. He's author of book chapters, and he has in particular, he's been editor of a book called Glimpses of Psychiatry for Medical Students and Practitioners. He's a founding member of the Minds Trust for Humanity and Health Sciences, and he's a past editor of the IPS Karnataka chapter and the Minds newsletter. Now, Kiran is going to talk to us. We can already see his beautiful medical college, Vaidehi, in the background. Risk assessment and prevention. Over to you, Kiran.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for providing me this opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to represent my alma mater, JSS, and to share the platform with my teachers, Dr. TSS Rao and Dr. Rajesh Raman. With the permission of the chair, I would like to go on to the next session, which will be on risk assessment and prevention. If there's any technical difficulties in between, if my slides are not visible, kindly stop me. So this is the place where I work. It's a 1,600 bedded medical college hospital in Bangalore. So at the end of the session, as mental health facilitators, one should be able to understand why risk assessment is important, to understand what is risk assessment, what are the risk factors for developing mental health conditions, and what are preventive strategies. Now, I will try to make it as simple as possible. Probably at the end of 15 minutes, we'll take a small break with few questions and go on with the next 15 minutes. So I'll try to restrict myself to around half an hour to maximum of 40 minutes. We know that the role of a mental health professional, particularly during a pandemic, is multidimensional. This is according to various studies that as mental health professionals, we are not only treating psychiatric illnesses, but also we are educating about risk, training various stakeholders, negotiating with various stakeholders, having administrative role, fundraising role, collaborative role, etc. Now, probably to put across a symposia like this, we have used multitude of these roles to make it a possibility. So the whole understanding is the role of a mental health professional, particularly during a disaster or pandemic, is much more. We have been seeing various speakers and various dignitaries commenting on the lack of mental health resources. To put it in absolute numbers, as of today in India, there are less than 9,000 psychiatrists, there are less than 1,000 clinical psychologists, less than 900 psychiatric social workers, and around 1,500 psychiatric nurses. And India spends a mere 0.06% of its health budget on mental health. So probably this slide will make you appreciate why we are training mental facilitators, because the sheer number of mental health professionals available in our country is very, very pathetic. So that's the whole reason for the symposium. So coming down to a very, very pertinent question, who is at risk of psychological impact due to COVID? Probably if I had thrown this question into an audience during, if it was a live webinar, probably all of us would raise our hands. Yes, it has affected all of us psychologically in various ways, either directly or indirectly. So the whole component of mind that Dr. Kishore was speaking in his first presentation, the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act is all been implicated and affected because of this pandemic. It is definitely unprecedented. And the kind of stress that it has produced is on a continuum. A lot of people from a state of stress, which is definitely there. We are all stressed today because of pandemic. It's almost been more than a year, and it's going on, and we see no immediate sight of relief because of the virus, it has led to some amount of distress. Some of us have gone into a state of disorder. Now, what you need to understand is the whole thing is a continuum. Various people are in the various phases of stress, distress, and disorder in this continuum. And it is also dynamic. Some of us who were distressed yesterday can become de-stressed because of various reasons, or we could have pushed into a state of disorder. Please understand the whole idea of this session is to understand various risk factors and assess those risk factors that pushes an individual from one state to another. Also, kindly note whenever we are making any kind of a distinction, any kind of a separation, it is arbitrary. It is for the purpose of simplification and for the purpose of understanding. They are not watertight compartments. That is, somebody with stress, which is acute in nature, can suddenly jump to a state of disorder within no time. A patient with a disorder state with little bit of help can definitely come back to a normalcy. So it's always dynamic. Initially, as professionals, whenever we are teaching or educating our students or various other people, what we say is symptoms are ubiquitous most of the time. Don't worry much about the symptom. Like somebody is telling, I'm just feeling sad. Somebody is telling, I'm not able to sleep. You worry more on the syndrome. That is a cluster of symptoms that we are worrying about. But however, this is what my previous speaker, Sudeep, spoke about, that these symptoms should be present to make it as a disorder or a syndrome. But unfortunately today, because of the pandemic, it's just not the psychiatric illness or the syndrome. We are also worrying at symptom level of various things, be it behavioral changes like excessive use of alcohol, excessive use of cannabis or some other substances, certain behavioral changes like repeatedly checking, going to the laboratory. We have patients or we have colleagues who have done RT-PCR almost a dozen times in just 3 4 weeks. It is because of their behavioral changes because of the fear. And also on the bigger scale, at a symptom level, there's a disaster response, which can be at a behavioral level, which can be at an attitudinal level. And the chairperson was talking that what we are today is a state of malignant uncertainty, and we are in continuous anxious distress. So it is very, very important to pick up symptoms and to understand whether it is going to progress into a disorder, particularly in a disaster situation. So what Sudeep was trying to say is, if a symptom has to go into a level of a disorder, or if a symptom has to be addressed as a disorder, it should be persistent. It should be present for a continuous duration, sometimes 2, sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes 6 months, whatever it is. It should be predominant. Like the patient should say, most of the time I'm feeling distressed, doctor. Most of the time I'm feeling anxious. Most of the time I'm feeling sad. It should be pervasive, irrespective of the environment, whether it is office, whether it is house, whether it is outside. You still have to feel it. That's when we say probably the patient is having a problem. So with this background, we try to understand what is risk assessment. But doing risk assessment for mental illnesses, or for that, be it hypertension, be it myocardial infarction, be it certain neurological disorder, it's very, very difficult because stress does not lead to disorder in each one of us. And for somebody to be vulnerable, there are multitude of factors. So the etiology of psychiatric disorders, or for that matter, a lot of non-communicable diseases, be it diabetes, hypertension, is multifactorial. Now, why am I giving the example of diabetes and hypertension is because you people appreciate it and understand it much more better compared to a psychiatric illness. So what does that mean? To assess the risk factor as of today, in psychiatry, we don't have a simple blood test, or we don't have a simple measure, or we don't have a simple biomarker that we say that, okay, this person has depression, this person has anxiety, or this person might develop psychosis or might commit suicide. It is slightly difficult. So we need to understand the etiological factors and then try to understand how do we assess them, or that is what is called risk assessment. And as of now, it is mostly through history taking, mostly through interaction, and through limited laboratory measures. So there are various factors for a person to develop an illness following a stressor. And it starts back from even before the child is born, from antenatal factors to a lot of perinatal factors, to developmental factors in childhood, academic performance, interpersonal skills, etc. In the background, there is a huge model called called as the biopsychosocial model. That is, there is various biological factors, various psychological factors, and various social factors that predisposes an individual into a disorder, and that is what we need to assess for. So this biopsychosocial model, for the purpose of understanding, I'll take you through a model called as a 4P model to understand how do we assess risk. So say imagine there is COVID today and we have always been affected, and that's the precipitating factor for various disorders. So probably the patient has developed either a symptom of distress or anxiety or mental illness, say, know that not everybody with a precipitating factor like COVID has developed a mental illness. A lot of us have been having resilience and we did not develop. So there should be a predisposition for this person to develop a mental illness. The predisposition can be again in the biopsychosocial model, which we'll come to it. For the model to continue, or for the mental illness to continue, there should be a lot of perpetuating factors that continues the illness. So we need to assess the risk of perpetuating factors. And as I told you, not everybody with precipitation or predisposition gets an illness, because a lot of us have protective factors. So we need to evaluate what are these protective factors so that we can work on prevention. The whole model based on a biopsychosocial model is called as a stress diathesis model. So in a predisposed individual, stress leads to a diathesis of a mental illness, or it can be any other illness. So it's just not the genes, it's just not the epigenetics we're talking about. It's a complex interaction between genes and the environment that leads to a phenotype. That is a vulnerable phenotype that you might have that requires a proper risk assessment. So the whole idea of risk assessment is to evaluate these factors and pick up vulnerable individuals from the population. So vulnerable individuals, we can pick it up from the individual level. We can pick it at the level of the psychosocial factors. So let us see what are these risk factors that you can pick up at individual level, particularly via interaction. It is mostly bedside, your basic mental health professionals or basic health professionals who are trying to elicit what are these risk factors in an individual. Somebody was asking a question, what is, there is a known history of mental illness already, and what happens if there is a disaster, the kind of disaster that we are talking in today? Absolutely right. A known history of mental illness is a risk factor, it's a red flag, and probably the propensity of having a relapse or worsening of a pre-existing condition is very high. In fact, if you see various studies that has been published in the recent past, the prevalence of depression, which was around 18%, 20%, etc., has risen to 40%, 50% according to various studies. No, those are huge numbers. Having a family history of mental illness, particularly first degree relatives having a family history of whatever it is, be it a mood disorder, be it an anxiety disorder, be it a psychotic disorder, is very, very important. It is a risk factor. It has to be assessed for, and this is what is called as genetic vulnerability. Ongoing chronic medical conditions, be it diabetes, be it hypertension, be it cardiovascular diseases, be it neurological disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc., are all risk factors. I will come to it a little bit later in the slide why the relationship between chronic medical condition and mental illness is bidirectional. If you have one or two chronic medical condition, the risk of you having mental illness increases 2 times more than the general population. Gender. Most of the studies, particularly in disaster, have seen that female gender is preponderantly involved. In fact, disorders like depression, some types of anxiety disorders are much more common in female. In fact, depression is 2 to 3 times much more common in female, and it is because of a lot of biological factors and also certain factors where, as a female gender, they undergo various epochs of life, be it puberty, be it pregnancy, be it postpartum, be it perimenopausal or postmenopausal, and they have various gendered roles that they have to suffice in the society. Therefore, they might be much more vulnerable both biologically and psychosocially. Coming to substance abuse, there are various substance abuses that can occur. Some are licit, some are illicit, be it nicotine, be it alcohol, be it cannabis, be it opioid. Substance abuse again have an adverse outcome on mental health conditions. They also have a bidirectional illness, or people with mental illness are known to abuse substances more. In one of the case vignettes, Dr. Kishore were talking about use of cannabis by an individual, which led to worsening of psychosis. These are very, very common presentation. So accessing risk for substance abuse in your history is very, very important. Certain personality issues be it dependent personality, anxious personality, little bit of anancastic personality, or personalities who are rigid, personalities who have difficult coping skills, etc., can be a risk factor for worsening or for onset of new psychiatric illness. Adverse childhood experiences or recent traumatic life experiences, be it loss of job, be it loss of loved ones, grief, bereavement, or childhood experiences in the form of childhood abuse, physical, sexual abuse, poverty, parental, marital discord, etc., are all individual risk factors for probably developing a psychiatric illness. So this is the vulnerability. This is a red flag. You need to look for these red flags. Coming to the psychosocial risk factors, now these are multitude of factors. I will try to probably touch on few of the psychosocial risk factors. Factors like low socioeconomic status. We were talking about a huge difference between the healthcare utilization in demographic status, urban versus rural. The chairperson was also talking about how divided we are as a society. And the reason for it is low socioeconomic status, where accessibility, availability of mental health resources is limited. Coming from broken families, dysfunctional family environment is a risk factor. Ethnicities, ethnic minorities, certain ethnic population are differently disadvantaged, and that is where we were talking about migration, the risk of migration, ethnicity, etc. Poverty is definitely a red flag. We need to look for this as a risk factor. Certain personality traits, as I told you, being dependent, being anxious, poor coping skills, stressful life events, again at a psychosocial level when we are talking about a community as a whole. Poor academic achievement, somebody like we were talking about the sector which is basically more affected in this pandemic. It's actually not somebody who has a stable job or a stable income. People who are coming from poor academic achievements, who are daily wage workers, etc., their life has become miserable because of the lockdown and thereof. Marital status is an important risk factor. People who are divorced, people who are single probably are much more vulnerable to disorders like depression, and also because of their loneliness, they can be much more vulnerable. Poor social support, though we are talking about a country like India where we thrive on joint families, today we are known that we are going towards nuclear families, urbanization, globalization are set in. So the social support that once was probably protective is dwindling today, and it is making us much more vulnerable. Religious beliefs and cultural beliefs are very, very important. I make it a point to teach all my students and undergraduates and postgraduates that whatever you do should be in the cultural milieu of the patient. Certain religious beliefs are definitely very, very helpful. They're protective. However, certain types of religious beliefs are probably counter protective. Somebody was asking about vaccination. Some of them are probably, they don't want to get vaccinated because of some cultural beliefs, some religious beliefs, etc. So everything plays a role, and these are the risk factors that we need to look into. Coming to an understanding, a simple understanding, I've just picked up depression from what Dr. Sudeep said. We know what is depression now. So we will see how these risk factors come together in a biopsychosocial model. So imagine an individual who has a biological factors with vulnerability to depression, that is, he might have some problems in his neurotransmitters or structural changes in the brain, etc., with a strong family history of depression, being from a female gender, having a chronic medical case, condition like diabetes or hypertension, ongoing substance abuse, alcohol or nicotine, they're all biological factors in this individual. So imagine psychological factors, having a person with low self-esteem, being shy introvert in nature, having poor problem-solving abilities from before, having insecure attachment skills, with poor social skills, including communication skills, they are psychological factors. Coming to added social factors, having poverty, having various childhood adversities, coming from a broken family, coming from urban background sometimes, having marital conflict, divorce, parental substance use, having community level stress. Say today we are talking about lockdown, we are talking about loss of job, we are talking about COVID, having traumatic events, it can be anything. So something like this is how we have to pick part. Not that in a given individual that we will get all these factors, but a combination of these factors will definitely be present, which you need to identify as risk factors and categorize that this person probably is a high risk individual for developing a psychiatric issue. This is what I was trying to say when we talk about shared biological pathogenesis. When we talk about certain illnesses like diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disorders, or most of psychiatric disorders, they have the same etiological link. That is, there are various factors that I told you, predisposing factors and precipitating factors, etc., that leads to various problems in the pathology, be it insulin resistance, be it beta cell apoptosis, be it hippocampal atrophy, be it endothelial dysfunction, or circadian rhythm disturbances, including disturbance in sleep, appetite. Now, if you look at any of these disorders on the right-hand corner, depression, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, etc., they are the same etiological pathway. So that is where I say the relationship between mental illness and chronic medical disorders is bidirectional. If you have one illness, the propensity of you having the other illness is more, sometimes even 2 to 3 times more. So always risk assessment includes assessment for other concomitant physical disorders, also substance use disorders. As I told you, people with mental illnesses are known to probably abuse substances 2 to 3 times more. Patients with substance use are known to have much more of mental illnesses, be it depression, be it anxiety, be it psychotic disorders sometimes. And in the current scenario, the relationship between COVID-19 and mental illness is also becoming bidirectional because a lot of people with mental illnesses are falling prey to the illness because of various behavioral aspects. COVID-19 itself has brought in a lot of neurocognitive changes, including worsening of mental illness at a symptom level or a syndrome level. So with this, I would take a small break before we go into the risk assessment in vulnerable population, which will be about 3-4 slides. And then we'll end up with the protective factors or the preventive factors. So any questions, we can take it now, sir. Hello.
Dr. Kiran.
Yes, Vinay.
Due to some technical issues, Dr. Mohan Isaac sir is not able to join. Meanwhile,
Okay.
there is one participant who has raised a hand, I think.
Okay.
Her name Neha Gandhi.
So we'll be talking about a risk assessment in vulnerable population. Now again, risk assessment in vulnerable population is a huge group because vulnerable group itself, we can keep on dividing them. Be it extremes of age, we are talking about children, elderly, pregnant women, persons with disability, homeless individuals, marginalized communities, be it community from LGBTQ group or communities who are being displaced, or people with lot with the work. Add a couple of more groups, we can have our own groups like doctors, frontline workers who are probably much more vulnerable in today's pandemic. But because of the paucity of time and some things will be repetition, we will concentrate on two important groups. One, the extreme end children, and the other extreme end geriatric population. Now children, the predisposition remains the same, the biological factors remains the same, childhood adversities, any problem during pregnancy, during the labor, etc. But these are some warning signs that you need to be worried. Particularly children today are being vulnerable because they have been restricted to house. They have been doing online classes from the past 1.5 years. There is not much of peer support. There is only digital interaction, and therefore it is a recipe for a disaster. Now, how much it will play along in the near future, I don't know. But however, we probably might see more and more behavioral issues coming up in children in the near future. So certain things are called warning signs or risk factors that you need to keep in mind when you're dealing with children. Excessive crying or irritation in younger children, returning of behaviors that they have outgrown, for example, toileting accidents or bedwetting. This is called regression in behavior. Excessive worry or sadness, which was not there. Unhealthy eating or sleeping habits, excessive eating, excessive sleeping. We know children are becoming obese, they're putting on weight. Irritability and acting out behaviors in teens. Poor school performance or avoiding school, including we have come across patients who are avoiding even the online classes, difficulties with attention and concentration, avoidance of activities that is enjoyed in the past, unexplained physical symptoms like body aches, headaches, etc. And in teenagers, particularly, use of substances like alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs as a means of probably getting out of the boredom are all warning signs or risk factors that you need to look into. Coming to the other end, the geriatric population that we have been talking about, comorbidity or pre-existing physical illness and occasionally mental health issues is more often it's very very common. It's just not that exception. It is mostly there in everybody, particularly geriatric. They have one or two chronic medical conditions invariably. Elderly living in old age homes is a huge risk factors. Probably if you have been following media from UK and other developed countries, the death rates or the mortality rates in the first wave of COVID was extremely huge in this vulnerable population. Living alone, loneliness is again a reality, because even in country like India, where I am telling that it's nuclear families that we have come to, elderly parents staying alone and their children being in some other part of the globe has become a reality. They also have biological factors in the form of cognitive impairment or neuropsychological impairment that makes them much more vulnerable. To assessing these impairments, asking questions about these things are all part of risk assessment. And a lot of them being probably unemployed, being probably retired, they have very poor financial support, and psychosocial support is also dying. Fear of dying alone, probably the kind of media visuals that they are getting. One thing that most of my elderly patients, when I am asked them a question, what is that you're worried about? They're actually not worried about death. They're worried about dying alone and probably not being able to get all the rituals that probably the dignity in death that they were expecting for their life. They probably fear that they're not going to get it. And that's an important risk factor. With all this assessing of risk factors in a biopsychosocial model, we'll come to the last part of risk assessment on a very, very important subject, which both Dr. Kishore and Dr. Sudeep touched upon: suicide. Assessment of self-harm or suicide is extremely important. Please note, according to WHO, one person completes a suicide every 40 seconds. And for every one completed suicide, there are about 20 to 25% of them who attempt suicide. So it's a huge, huge burden. Suicide is my area of interest because it's a preventable specialty. And please note, one of the common myths is people with psychiatric illnesses are the only one who commit suicide. No, in the general population, anybody can commit suicide. And more so, it took us a pandemic to again refocus on this the pandemic of suicide, when we looked at such media that COVID patients committing suicide, frontline workers committing suicide, etc. We also have a small app called as a Shuffle app. It's a free Android app, again given by JSS and our own trust called Minds United Trust. Anybody interested can download this. It assesses, or it helps you to assess what is the risk for an individual. And these are based on age, gender, marital status, etc. It will give you an outline on what is the risk, whether it is high risk, whether it is moderate risk or low risk, and what to do if this risk is taken care of. Now, what is that you need to assess, or what are the risk factors that you will be looking for? They can be broadly divided into something called static and dynamic risk factors. So static risk factors, the questions that you will ask when you're assessing risk is previous history of self-harm. Now, if you ask one question that is very, very important or very, very determinantal is previous history of self-harm. If somebody has harmed themselves in the past, the risk of harming again will be 2 to 3 times more. Having a diagnosis of a psychiatric disorder will definitely increase the risk, particularly diagnoses like depression, anxious distress, psychosis, etc., increases by 10 to 15 folds. Having concomitant substance abuse, be it any kind of abuse, is a risk factor for suicide. Family history of suicide or genetic, it is very, very important. Recent stresses or recent loss, be it grief, be it bereavement, particularly loss of spouse, loss of loved ones in this pandemic is very, very important. Certain demographic factors like age, gender, and marital status, that is, older individuals or geriatric populations are much more vulnerable than they probably more completers than attempters. Male gender, being divorced are all risk factors that you need to look for. Other dynamic factors like having active suicidal ideations, excessive guilt and hopelessness, which has become a part of the pandemic, extreme mood swings and anger, changes in biodrives, increase or reduction in sleep, increase or reduction in appetite, energy levels, current substance use. See, for various reasons, substance use is repeatedly, and it's a very, very important risk factor. Having psychosocial stressors, be it unemployment, be it divorce, be it poverty, having problem solving deficit at your personality level, they're all factors for suicide. So with this background, we know that there are so many factors that make an individual have a risk for developing an illness. Today we are talking about psychiatric illness, but most of them are also the same factors for developing other non-communicable diseases. But we also know that not everybody who has a propensity or who has a precipitating factor develop an illness because they have a lot of protective factors. So the whole idea of this session is to identify these protective factors and try to see if I can work at a prevention. Prevention can be primordial, which is sometimes difficult in multifactorial disorders like psychiatric disorders, but early recognition and treatment is definitely possible. So preventive strategies, as I told you, not all people are vulnerable. We need to probably identify target population. Example, history of problem drinking, family history of smoking, etc. Focuses on never try, delay for later period, take early help when in problem. So never delay, never procrastinate. So preventive strategy, it can be universal preventive intervention when we are looking at the whole globe, the whole population, which is feasible, but it is definitely time incentive and probably labor incentive. Universal preventive strategies that we can do at our level, like exercise, good nutrition, having routines, hobbies, art, literature, working with somebody who requires help. They're all something that we can be doing at a universal level. Selective interventions can be done if you probably select a target population. It can be children in schools where we have things like school mental health programs, or we can be having somebody an elderly at an who's isolated in an old age home. They can be having selective intervention. Indicated preventive interventions can be used for a group. There's somebody with substance use, somebody with marital issues, somebody with grief, etc. So it is very, very important to prevent, to devise such preventive strategies at various levels. So how will you do that? So it's a huge global socio-ecological model that we need to work on. At individuals, we can work on individuals by strengthening their families, they're strengthening their interpersonal bonds. At the level of organization, one of this activity that we are doing is actually a socio-ecological model for prevention. We can use inter-organizations. We can look at the community level where you people who have become mental health facilitators can go and help at the community level. At the public policy national levels, there can be a lot of things that can be done. In the inauguration, we had distinguished guests who said that at the university level, at the policy level, they're doing a lot of things. So it requires a team effort and it cannot be done at an individual level. So we need to identify what are the risk factors. Say, for example, in a child, if you look at these risk factors like difficult temperament, low self-esteem, negative style of thinking, or a lot of family factors that we discussed, or school-related factors, life events that has occurred, say, because of a pandemic, and social factors, be it stigma, discrimination, we have to look on the right-hand corner where we work on a lot of protective factors. Now, rather than discussing this slide, I will try to put it down in a next slide as a conclusion slide. So what we have done in risk assessment is, yes, we knew that there was a lot of problems going on because of a disaster or a pandemic. It was all cluttered. Now, by identifying various biopsychosocial factors in the 4P model, we try to declutter it and see if it makes sense. If we know that the individual has become vulnerable or not, if it has become vulnerable, how do we devise certain preventive strategies to prevent him for further deterioration? So this will be the last conclusion slide of mine, which summarizes the 4P model. So if you look at the 4P model, and in a biopsychosocial background, say, for example, there can be predisposition in the form of genetic vulnerability. That is biologically vulnerable. There is some problem with the serotonergic system. There is problem with the structural system in the brain, etc. There can be psychological factors in the individual like isolation, insecurities, fear, etc., which can be there earlier. It need not be there present. Poverty, coming from broken family, etc., are social predisposing factors. Say, put upon this, there is precipitating factor in the form of COVID, and in the biosphere, there is substance abuse concomitantly that is going on. There's recent loss of spouse or family members because of COVID, worry about losing a job because of COVID. So these are probably precipitating factors. Certain perpetuating factors, like biological perpetuating factors like chronic medical illness, like I said, diabetes, hypertension, neurological disorders, etc. Poor coping skills of the individual, stigma associated with probably acceptance of psychiatric illness, or understanding what is this ongoing transition. Now, this is how beautifully a biopsychosocial model with the three P's fits in. What is the last P? How can we prevent it? what is the protective factors. So working on certain biological protective factors like exercise, adequate sleep, building up resilience by various methods. Psychological factors, building up cognitive behavioral strategies, problem solving strategies, understanding the problem, taking the help of professionals, and having a good social support, be it at the level of community, be it at the level of family and faith support, or if at all there is an illness, adequate disability support to various things. Now, each one of these protective factors in the form of management will be covered by my colleagues tomorrow. So with this, I would like to end the risk assessment and we will be opening the session for questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Kiran, for an excellent presentation. Very simple. You have presented the 4P model. As your presentation was going on, somebody had already put a comment saying that your explanation of the biopsychosocial model was very clear and very lucid. This is before you presented the last slide. After the last slide, it has become more lucid. So before I open up we have some time for questions. Some questions have also come. People can raise their hands, and if they want to, the organizers will unmute them and they can ask questions. Couple of things I want to highlight from Kiran's presentation. He said that all of us are in a kind of a dynamic. Some of the audience, who are attending, they said they are on the verge of burnout, etc., etc. And the other thing is that the stress diet is biopsychosocial model has been explained very well. What is most important is that we have to work on the protective factors, and that has also been explained by Kiran very well. Now, many people have thanked you for the excellent presentation. Not many questions have come up. But meanwhile, since Sudeep's presentation, we didn't have much time after his presentation. There was a question. This is addressed to Sudeep, I know, because it is evolved out of his presentation about the obsessive compulsive disorder. He made a distinction about obsession as a disorder and as a trait. So the question is if somebody has an OCD trait, is it a serious problem? Of course, my guess is that the person who asked the question may have an OCD trait. And then it goes on. What is the cause? Are environmental factors responsible for this OCD trait, or upbringing responsible for OCD trait? So Sudeep, you may wish to answer this question. You provoked the question by your presentation and slides on OCD. Sudeep, would you like to answer?
Basically, it is not a disorder if there is not a group of, Kiran sir was telling, there's a group of symptoms, and if it is not causing significant dysfunction and distress to you. But if there is trait with related to personality, for example, you are very systematic and very rigorous in doing things, like for example, very perfect in doing things, then it might not be it might not need any medical or attention, because it is helping you. But when it is causing you so much distress, or it is causing distress to people around you, only then it is then probably you might be having OCD. So the reason for it is there is multiple reasons for it. It could be social factors, for example, your upbringing, and how probably family, like your parents have pushed you to do certain things in certain way, and that is how you carried out. Or it could be a disorder where there is some biological aspects to it, some neurotransmitter level biochemical aspects to it, which might need attention. So if there is a trait and it is not affecting others, or it is not affecting your functioning, then it doesn't need any medical attention, and it might not be a problem. So sir, you want to add on that, sir?
No, I just wanted to add that Evidently, the person who asked the question is a little concerned. And after your slides and detailed description, he realized that he has some of these traits. What I would want to add is, many of you who are in the audience, who are very good students, may have obsessional traits. There's nothing bad about it. You are perfectionist, you will come on time, you will submit your homework assignments on time, etc., etc. I want to highlight the last thing which Steve said. If it doesn't interfere with your life and activities a lot, being obsessive is not bad. It's good for others around you. You will keep the place neat and clean. You will come on time for everything. So that is fine. Thank you very much for Sudeep. Thank you very much, Sudeep, for answering that question. If anybody else has also realized that going through Sudeep's detailed slide about obsession, you have some of the traits, don't worry at all. Now, next question is to Kiran. This is from an anonymous attendee. Evidently, he or she doesn't want to identify himself. That is perfectly all right, because this is a personal question. Does genetic vulnerability indicate that if my mother has some kind of a panic disorder, then will I also get it? You did, of course, provoke people about, showing about genetic vulnerability, other factors, so you can answer that question.
Definitely, having a first degree family member with a psychiatric illness is a risk factor. But what you need to understand is none of the psychiatric disorders are single gene in inheritance. They are polygenetic inheritance, we say. Say, for example, if your father is diabetic, the risk of you getting diabetes is to a certain degree more. If both of your parents are diabetic, yes, much more. But that doesn't mean that you get diabetes. Okay, the similar way, if there is a family history of panic attack or anxiety or a depression, the risk of the progeny getting the same illness might be slightly on the higher side. There are again various studies to say what is the risk, but definitely it is not a single gene inheritance that you will get it. The risk is definitely there. So early identification and prevention is what will be useful.
Thank you, Kiran. Back to you, Sudeep, again. You have a very good and very intelligent audience. The question is, if obsessions are not followed by compulsions, can we call it as distorted cognition or anxiety of unrealistic things? You are a psychologist, so you are the most appropriate person to answer this. Is it distorted cognition or anxiety of unrealistic things? Sudeep.
There are sometimes it happens that there are obsessions which are not accompanied by observable compulsions or something that you do evidently. Sometimes sometimes you do mental compulsions. For example, counting within mind, but it is not seen as compulsion. So that can happen, or it could be that your obsessions, you are misinterpreting obsessions as for ruminations. These thoughts that repeatedly come. So you have to be careful about that. Not all the thoughts that repeatedly come might not be obsessive quality. It can be ruminations also.
Okay, thank you. Now back to Kiran. This is a very general question. Sir, how to prevent the psychological impact of COVID? The general question.
Yeah.
Prevention.
So as I told you, it is probably, since I told most of these problems are multifactorial in etiology, probably the way we prevent it is multimodal. So what does that mean? We need to involve different levels. It can be at an individual level where certain universal preventive strategies like regular exercise, getting back to some routine, having some de-stressing measures, talking out about your problems. It need not be always to a mental health professional. It can be just to one significant elderly in your house where you can sit and talk about it. It can be a relative of yours whom you trust. Okay. So some of these things can definitely be helping you to prevent. Other orders, like at the community level, having some kind of a community program, getting involved in some kind of an NGO activities gives you sense of belongingness, sense of gratitude, sense of doing something. And at an policy level decision making, we can do a lot of things so that we can prevent certain psychological impact of the pandemic situation.
That's very good. There are, let me just quickly have a look. There are not many other questions. but lots of comments on the chat box, complimenting all the three speakers, saying very good presentation, any number of them, good presentation, well done, etc., etc. Now, in response to, there is another question. Is cancer a risk factor during this pandemic? Can you comment on that in detail? This is to Kiran.
Yes,
You have mentioned
definitely
about it, but comment on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cancer is definitely a risk factor. Please note, anybody with any kind of medical illness are probably much more vulnerable to psychological distress in general. And at Vaidehi, we have a 300-bedded Vaidehi Institute of Oncology. And the care of patients with cancer was definitely compromised because of various events, be it lockdown, be it non-availability of transportation, etc. So there are different barriers. So patients with cancer, probably they are much more vulnerable to develop COVID because they are on an immunocompromised state. And patients with cancer, since they are not being able to get the adequate care and the fear and their vulnerability, they might be much more vulnerable to mental illnesses as well. So as I told you, it's a bidirectional flow and it has to be taken into consideration.
Okay, I think it is now 5:30. And we have also got one comment, and this is from Vijay Chandru, who says that
He's
all the
raising
presentations did very well. And let me just see Vijay Chandru's. You did
He's
not
raising
ask
the hand,
question.
sir.
Okay, okay. Do you want to let him ask the question?
He can
You
unmute
did
himself
not-
and ask the question.
Please unmute and ask the question, Mr. Vijay Chandru. Anyway, there's a comment from Vijay Chandru. Very nice presentation from all the presenters.
This is
Vijay Chandru, yes.
Yeah, I am speaking. Oh, this is again question to Kiran.
Yes, sir.
It was the same general question. Actually, it is basically related with the obsessive compulsive disorder people. Are they very prone for getting COVID infection because of the fear of getting? So I feel mental component is acting more on the people, that they are very fear. They keep sanitizing each and every time. I mean, that is not being conveyed to the community people who also studied like post-graduation. They would have done some MSc, something like that. But they are very much fear. They have a lot of stress that they will get the COVID infection. So can we educate properly so that this is not the way? So you just have to. I mean, you just have to mask yourself and do a safe distancing. That itself is more than sufficient, and sanitizing every now and then is not so important. When you just have to, your hand should not come near to the mouth, and your eyes is more important. These things is better. So like how to communicate to the people, that is what is like confusing.
Yes, definitely, sir. In fact, even in scientific forums, we have been having discussions on when do we say it is normal and when do we say it is abnormal, because certain things like you look at media, any kind of media, the first thing they say is wash your hand. Now you cannot penalize a person, or probably you cannot label a person that you're washing more, so you have OCD. So there is a little bit of blurring of boundaries because of the pandemic, particularly when we talk about obsession of cleaning, washing, checking, etc. Identifying the whole syndrome in these kind of patients, the kind of distress it produces, and if it is impairing their daily routine functioning is very important. If we know that it is becoming pathological, educating that person is important. See, somebody is slightly cautious, probably they have been doing a little bit more of hand washing, then probably in this pandemic situation, we would try to probably accept it, I think, rather than labeling them. But any distress is what we have to catch.
Okay, fine.
Okay,
Thank you,
I
sir.
think we have now exceeded 5:30. I would like to, before I hand over, there is a comment from one of the participants, which said that all the presenters did an excellent job of conveying things very simply, in a very simple way. I have also been asked to announce that tomorrow there will be 2 more presentations and it starts at 10:30. Please remember that the whole module completes only when you have attended all the 5 sessions. And if you do want to get an e-certificate, please also fill up the Google forms which will be communicated to you. it is just for us to know how well we have delivered all the things. Uh, uh, Positive comments are still keeping on coming. Very educative seminar. But before I hand over to the organizers, one last chance for all the three speakers, Kishore, Sudeep, and Kiran, to make any final comments. Kishore?
Uh, I would like to say that when we try to understand the impact of COVID-19 on mental health, there is a lot of learning going on to all of us. Just like people try to understand COVID, the causative factors, the how it propagates, and how we should prevent. There's a long journey for all of us to understand what are the emerging trends in mental health issues, what kind of strategies we should devise, and how should we channelize. But the end of the day, we want to communicate that as a mental health facilitator, irrespective of the position you hold, it is a chance for you to join service and enhance mental health service by uh, right knowledge, appropriate communications, and reasonable skills. Sir, thank you.
Sudeep?
Nothing much from my end. I hope that the presentation was helpful, and people who have attended are able to identify or screen so that we prevent people from having much more serious condition, or much more severe condition. No, I think that would be a very good start to all the people who are in different job positions that they're doing, because we all interact with people, we all meet people, we all socialize. So I think I hope this session was helpful in identifying and screening and referring to appropriate services.
Kiran?
Yeah, my last comment will be as mental health facilitators, the idea of just sitting with your client, empathetically listening to them, at the same time assessing certain risk factors, which is not rocket science the way you have learned today. It is very simple factors. If you can do that, intervene at your level, refer when appropriate, that will serve the purpose of this symposium. Thank you.
I see the former head of the department on the screen, but hiding. I don't know if he wanted to say anything, since it is your ex-department which organized this program, this excellent program. So Dr. T.S.S. Rao, any quick comments before we close?
A great show, and in fact, it only shows the extent of cooperation and help what we are receiving from the authorities. So also the dynamism of Kishore to coordinate and conduct the program with a very specific aim of what actually IPS is trying. That means enabling health workers to deal with the problems. And as you mentioned in the beginning, this is not a job to be done only by psychiatrists at all, and not possible also. So the medical students, health workers, our colleagues in the different departments, they are the backbone of any success what we may be thinking in terms of this pandemic like COVID-19. It is a great show, and tomorrow I will be there again listening to each and every word is being spoken. I have spent time in front of the computer here. It only shows the way it actually kept us occupied and maybe to concentrate on. Great show by each of the speakers, what they have done a job. Thank you very much. And for you, so much of time and being with us all the time, anytime, and whenever we have asked you is actually something phenomenal, and we are grateful to you, sir.
Thank you. So from tomorrow's speakers, Vinay and Kulkarni, revise your slides. Dr. T.S.S. Rao is going to listen from beginning till end. We are continuing to get a lot of positive complimentary comments, but a couple of people have said that they had internet problems and they would want to have access to the slides later on. I myself had internet problem because of the power failure, and my bandwidth has been fluctuating. So With this, I think I would close. I'm delighted to note that our numbers have not depleted very much over the last 3 hours. It is still very, very decent and very good. So back to the organizers. I don't know if anybody will take over from me or I should close. Either Vinay or Kishore could take over. I'll hand over to Kishore and then you can end the program.
At the outset, seeking the blessings of His Holiness, we are indeed privileged to have all of you on this 2-day webinar. My humble pranams to His Holiness, to Pro Chancellor B. Suresh, to Vice Chancellor Dr. Surinder Singh, Dr. Manjunath, Registrar, Director of JSS Hospital, Dr. Colonel M. Dayanand, JSS Medical College Dean and Principal Dr. H. Baswan Godappa, Professor and Honorary General Secretary of Indian Psychiatric Society, Professor T.S.S. Rao, Dr. Rajesh Raman, all the speakers who joined, Dr. Ravindra, who is the Chief Information Officer, who has been coordinating all the things. More importantly, audience from such a diverse background staying with us and trying to incorporate many things we say. We have conveyed in this. I hope this has been a learning experience, and on time we have concluded with immense gratitude to Professor Mohan Isaac, who, despite a lot of hurdles in network, continued to be there and ensure this program is well moderated. Sir, thank you so much. And tomorrow morning, with the same link, we will all be back at 10:30 a.m. sharp with the first talk led by Dr. Vinay HR on approach and management to mental health condition, which is the most important part, followed by integration of services by Dr. Praveen Kulkarni, who is the associate professor. So both these two talks are equally important for day 2. With this, we will conclude today's program. Thank you, one and all.